Hi everybody. This vehicle is a 2008 Chevy Cobalt, and today I'm doing a relative compression test using my Autel scope. This vehicle has a blown head gasket. I'm not sure exactly what cylinder it is. I think it's number 3 because I was getting a P303 misfire code. But using the scope, you can definitely see that one of the cylinders is lower than all the rest. Actually, it looks like there might be 2 that are a little bit low. So today I'm going to show you how I have it set up and how I'm doing the test, and most importantly, what settings I'm using on my amp clamp and what settings I'm using in the computer to get the display to read correctly. Because when doing stuff like this on a scope, that seems to be, the most important is how you have it set up so you get the results you want to see. So anyway, start out, we'll just take a look under the hood, and this is the 2.2 liter 4-cylinder engine. And what I've done so far to do the relative compression test is I pulled out the fuse that supplies power to the coils and the injectors. So it's very convenient on this car. It's just one fuse. It actually goes right there. The second one down from the 10 amp, right there is a 15 amp fuse. So I pulled that out, so we have no power going to the coils or the injectors. And there she is. So I have my laptop hooked up, and this just happens to be the scope I'm using. MaxiScope from Autel, and there's a model number, MP408. And so on this car, the battery's in the trunk, so I have to hook up everything in here. I had this hooked up before, but I'm not charging the battery right now. So got the negative connected to the negative terminal in the battery, positive connected to the positive. And then I have the amp clamp. So this one's a CC650. It's the big clamp for going around big battery wires. And this is the direction I have it. So that arrow I put on there is for current flow. So we're doing conventional theory here, where power leaves out of the red wire and goes that way. So that's how I have it set up. And for my conversion, I'm using 1 millivolt equals 1 amp. Or actually, it's the other way around. 1 amp equals 1 millivolt. Instead of 100 milliamps equals 1 millivolt. So this gives you a nice reading on the screen. And then we just check really quick to make sure I actually have it zeroed out. So I'm going to go up here and just turn the scope on real quick. And then the red line is my volts, because I have that connected to channel A. And then the blue line is the amps, the current. I have that connected to channel C. And it looks like, yeah, that blue line is just a little bit lower than 0. So let me zero it out real quick. I've got to hit this button. It's a little bit finicky on here. If you press it in, sometimes it gets stuck. So just press it a couple times. That'll zero out the amp clamp. And like I was saying, so here on the scope, channel A, this wire goes to the 2 volt connectors, and channel C goes to the amp clamp. And that's just the way I have it. I mean, you could do it any way you want. If you want it in B and D, or if you want to flip them around, really doesn't matter. So let's see how that line looks. Let me just stop it real quick. There we go. That's pretty much on 0. That's an important thing you have to do. It's just zeroing out your amp clamp so you get a accurate reading. I want to start at 0 amps. I don't want to have it start at, say -10 or something like that. So there's the basic setup. Pulled the fuse, so I have no power going to the injectors or the coils, so the engine won't be able to start. have the voltage clamps on the battery, the amp clamp on the positive cable. And now let's look at what the software settings are. So there's really just a couple here. First of all, I have channel A and C turned on. So you see B and D are grayed out, they're not being used. And then for channel A, I like to set it up manually. So I have it set for 20 volts DC, and I leave it at X1. And then for channel C, for the amp clamp, I actually have to select the clamp. So, like I was saying, this is a CC650 clamp. So if you look in the menu, try and do this here. It's a little bit hard when you're looking through a phone screen. There's all kinds of different clamps you can choose from in different scales. Like I have a smaller amp clamp that's a CC65, but in this case I'm using the big one, CC650, and I have it on the 650 amp scale. The reason is because when you do initial start, when the starter motor first starts to turn the engine over, it draws a lot of current. So I could set it to the 200 amp scale and it would still read okay, but I really wouldn't get a good visual of that initial crank, how much it takes to actually get the motor to start turning over. Just that first revolution. Actually, I guess it would be the first half rev. So anyway, that's what I pick. Let's click out of there. And then I have it set for 200 amps. So I could set this a little bit higher. I've actually tried this in a couple different scales. I've tried it at 500 amps. I've tried it at 1 kiloamp, 1000 amps. But 200 amps, it doesn't actually show me that first turnover, but it gives me a really nice display of what relative compression looks like on the screen. So if I set it higher, it's just that the little the wave pattern that shows up is not quite as pronounced. It's a little bit harder to see it. So that's what I pick. Other than that, there's two other things I do. I do 10 million samples, so that's what the 10 ms means, and you can see that down here in the bottom. Sample quantity is 10 million. By default, the system wants to go to 1 million, which is fine. You still get a good reading, but when you zoom in later for diagnosing your waveform, you just get a way better resolution. You get a lot more data points if you pick 10 million. So that's why I do that. And then finally, the scale for time. This is one of the ones that takes some trial and error to get it to look right on the screen. And for this case, I have it set to 500 milliseconds per division. And the reason is because I want to see across the screen, I want to see a lot of engine revolutions. So if I set it smaller, which I've tried 200 mil, 100 milliseconds, I've even gone above 500, you just don't get enough engine revolutions on the screen to make a good comparison. So that's why I like using 500 milliseconds. So that's a lot of yapping about the setup. Why don't we do a quick test roll and see what it looks like on the screen. So I don't have a trigger set up in this case. I'm just going to let this start running. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to start the scope, and then quick turn the engine over. So here goes. All right. Okay. So I just went long enough so I'd get one full screen of data. So let me just back up. What did I get here? I got 4 screens in total. So I'm going to back up. This is when I shut it off. So I'll back up to screen number 3 of 4. And there we go. So we have a whole lot of engine revs on this display. And you can see where this is helpful for checking your engine's compression. So each one of these peaks on here basically showing a piston going up and down. So you can see, obviously it's a 4-cylinder engine, and if you look across here, you can see there's a repeating pattern. So you have one high, two kind of the same, and then one low, and then one high, two kind of the same, and then one low. And it just repeats across the screen. So if this engine was in better shape, if it didn't have a blown head gasket, these peaks would all be kind of the same all the way across. And you wouldn't see so much variation. And you might be thinking, well, that really doesn't look like a whole lot of variation, but it actually is. And if you see a pattern, a relative compression pattern, on an engine that's running better, you just don't see this kind of variation between the cylinders. So, this isn't the end all. I still have to pull all these coils out and hook up an actual compression gauge so I can see which cylinder is causing me the problem. Obviously when I report this to the customer, I'm going to want to tell them, it's cylinder 3 or cylinder 2 or whatever. I'm not just going to want to say, well, I don't know which one, but I know one of them is low. So that's going to have to be done. And of course, it's a head gasket problem, so there's engine coolant getting into the cylinders. It's blowing out the tailpipe. So I'm also going to want to hook up a pressure gauge to the coolant and see if I can find out, if there's an external leak, which there's not. It's definitely internal. And you can also tell that kind of simply by looking under the cap, seeing all that yellow foam. And also pulling the dipstick. That nice sludgy oil. Yummy. So, anyway, that's not the point of this video. The point of it was to show you how I'm setting up my Autel scope to get relative compression on this Chevy Cobalt. So, if you're trying to do this on yours, I hope at least the part where I'm showing you how I set up the laptop, how I set up the software, I hope you find that helpful. Because when I was first starting out doing this kind of work, that was the hardest part, was figuring out how to set up the screen, how to set up the laptop to actually display it correctly so you get some useful information out of your scope trace. So, hope this helps if you're doing this kind of work, either on a Chevy Cobalt like this or anything else. So, pretty cool. Well, if you have any questions or have any comments, post them below. And thanks for watching. And if you like my videos, please give a thumbs up and please subscribe.